Hello. Today we are having an academic text readathon. I have been reading like crazy for my literature review that I'm writing for my personal project right now. My personal project being a neural network that I'm trying to build that will basically demonstrate what happens when hippocampal sharp wave ripples are thrown off as a memory is trying to encode from short-term memory, so hippocampal memory to long-term memory. And how will that affect the narrative creation ability of my neural network? As we're reading, we're going to get a little bit more technical with the terms, but that's pretty much what I'm working on right now. And it's getting pretty into it. I'm getting pretty far in for along now. I'm trying to read 60 plus texts, and I'm about 17 or 18 texts in, and it's getting really exciting because I've been really gathering some new information that I want to get together. But in the meantime, I want to just read. So today we're going to be just reading for the rest of the night. It's about 9 p.m. right now, even though it's still completely light outside. And I want to read maybe at least until midnight. And I think I'll maybe take some pauses in between to just talk about things that I'm interested in, or just talk about what's on my mind as I'm reading. The first thing to get off my mind before I go into the reading is that I've been really craving hearing from successful women recently, hearing their advice about how they handle their life, because as I worked on this personal project, I've really shifted into a different energy, and I've really started to demand more of myself and started to demand myself to operate on a higher standard and to produce at a higher standard than I ever have before. And I have just realized how I think I don't always take the time to realize that, and I don't always take the time to realize the standard I'm holding myself to. And I think the high standard I've held myself to has just become the normal way that I've functioned throughout the day. So I'm not congratulating myself. I'm not being like, wow, that's amazing that you're operating at that standard that you set, or anything of that nature. Uh, I just sort of expect it of myself, and because of that, I think I just haven't really taken the time to thank myself and to just be like, thank you for operating like this, and thank you for really putting my success first and all of these things. And that's just something that I've realized, sort of been thinking about recently, and I wonder if that's normal for maybe a lot of other people who have like high standards for themselves. At some point it just becomes your normal, and you're not really impressed by yourself anymore, and you're not really sort of excited by the fact that you can meet your own standards. And I think that it gets a little bit I think it gets I've been feeling a little bit drained recently, and I think maybe that's why. But I would love to hear from people if they relate to that, and maybe what they do to congratulate themselves. I was thinking I should definitely get myself a little gift or something when I finish this project, because I haven't really had time to take stock of what I'm doing. I'm starting a master's degree program in a few months, and I'm working all of these jobs, and I'm financially saving. I'm doing all of these things that are quite difficult tasks, and I could be spending my time right now just hanging out, having fun, and resting before I start my master's degree program in a few months. And instead, I'm trying to read 60 texts and doing all this really intense deep thinking about neural networks and neuroscience and all these things. And I think I just haven't really taken the time to stop and be like, wow, that's amazing that I'm doing that, and I don't have to, and nobody's making me do it, and I'm just doing it, and that's pretty cool. So yeah, I need to figure out a little way to just keep myself. I'm not even looking for the motivation. I think that's the part surprising me. I'm not even expecting it, but I think I should, even not expecting it of myself and just expecting myself to operate that way, I think I should still congratulate myself, because I don't think I've really processed how cool that is, or just how big of a deal it is that I'm doing this, particularly because it means so much to me. So yeah, just that thought as we get into the reading, but we're gonna start reading now. I've been in a really funny cluster of texts right now, because a lot of them have been this one researcher's. Okay, so these two researchers basically wrote the text called Dissociation and Trauma, a New Definition in Comparison with Previous Formulations. And basically, the whole text is they have this really specific sort of way that they define dissociation, which is dissociation is only basically when a person has their personality sort of split into these different sort of systems, right? And basically what they're saying is that even post-traumatic stress disorder, which people, I would say the average person wouldn't necessarily always view as a dissociative disorder, they're saying that's also a sort of dissociative disorder. I actually see why that can be. When I read the theory of structural dissociation in the first place, they already described it like that, so I was already getting that definition from the beginning, so I'm not disagreeing with that. But it's interesting because I've been reading actually this is the third text I've read. The first two texts were just other psychologists or, you know, people in the field basically getting really upset at this person's definition, these people's definition of dissociation. So it's been really funny how controversial, like now I'm really getting into the controversy. I think when people told me it was controversial, the first controversy I ever found, which was the main source of the text, was basically, does dissociative identity disorder even exist? Or I've heard some people say dissociative amnesia is even a little bit sort of wishy-washy. They're not 100% convinced on it 100% of the time. So I think that was the controversy I hit in the first place. And now I'm hitting this bubble of controversy, which is what even is dissociation and how do we define it? And it's been a lot. It's been a lot to take in. Like, it's been really interesting to just sift through and just like, whoa, there's so many. And this text that I'm reading the text of these authors that everybody's critiquing, the dissociation and trauma text, and they're going into everybody else's definitions in the field, and I've just been really shocked by how many people have made so many definitions of what they think dissociation is, and that's been just really fascinating for me. I'm gonna be honest, I don't agree with everything in this text. I don't think, and I mean, everybody's seeming like they have their own perception. I don't agree with everything in the text so far, but I'm not sure yet what I think about everything else, so I've just been really sitting with it and trying to piece together what I think. The main thing that I don't, actually, they were convincing me a little bit. I haven't been 100% certain for the real structure dissociation debate fans. I haven't really been certain. I don't know, like, I basically, the part that I was a little bit taking a little bit of issue with is the part about whether normal dissociation experiences are dissociation as well, whether we should cluster them in. So that's things like zoning out or getting really absorbed in a movie. Should we count them as dissociation? Some people, these researchers are saying no. Some other researchers also said no because they think the category of dissociation is getting too broad. And I can honestly understand that mentality. I do think that is a bit difficult, and maybe we should keep it really tuned into more pathological experiences. So that's been like the first thought. I actually just got to the part where they're breaking apart Dell's definition of dissociation, which is funny because I actually read his critique first, so I think I jumped in with that in the back of my head. The other critique that I read, which was really interesting for me because the reason I got into this structural dissociation in the first place was that I wrote my undergraduate thesis on this type of, well, some people say it's a type of dissociative identity disorder, definitely a type of dissociative disorder called possession trance disorder, where people feel like they're being possessed by another sort of entity. And I was a comparative literature and societies major, so I was obviously coming at this from a cross-cultural psychology kind of perspective. And so I read another interesting text called Defining and Delimiting Trauma-Related Dissociation, A View from Cultural Psychiatry. I actually didn't realize until I went back to put my notes down that even they were critiquing that same exact text. So everybody's just, I feel like it's Twitter beef for academics, this whole entire thing. I don't know, it's a bit crazy, but yeah, it's just like, what? Everybody's coming at it, everybody's got an opinion. But I actually found this one interesting because I came from that cross-cultural psychology background of my one thing that I wrote in cross-cultural psychology, but they're saying that some of the specificities of these researchers' definition actually is a little bit complicated or not accurate if you look at it from a cross-cultural psychology perspective, because the researchers of the very controversial text everyone's responding to basically are saying that they think that dissociation should be only about trauma. Like, only traumatic experiences should we traumatic forms of dissociation should we call dissociation. But this text by this person discussing, I'm staying away from names because I don't want to mispronounce anybody's name. But okay, this text from this person who's going into the cross-cultural psychology perspective, they're saying that actually they would say probably the majority of dissociative experiences are actually not traumatic and probably come from people engaging in these sorts of like dissociation-based rituals, possession rituals, and things like that. So that was really interesting actually for me to read because I was like, oh yeah, I wrote about that. That's pretty cool. So just a lot to think about. And the question for me on my paper is how much of it actually matters. And now I'm getting like my head's kind of like spinning because I don't really know what to define my terms as and what is my project. I have a sense of what my project's doing, but what's it going to be touching on? Because is it even touching on non-traumatic forms of dissociation? Perhaps not. So do I just say that I want to say dissociation is only trauma, or maybe only in my paper I'm thinking about trauma only? Probably I should say that. So that's just been an interesting sort of thought process that I've gone along as I am reading. But it's not really funny, but for me it's funny because I think it's just interesting to see how everybody's just really reactive to this text. Okay, I read, when I was writing my undergraduate thesis, I read a lot about dissociative absorption because that was a big thing for me when I was talking about trance rituals and things of that nature. And I am kind of just thinking that maybe, for example, like, I guess what I'm thinking as I'm reading this is maybe the tendency to have these sorts of normal dissociations, we can just say are traits, but not necessarily dissociation. I kind of, now as I'm reading, I am agreeing that I do think it's different. So maybe people have a tendency towards being a certain way, but it's not dissociation per se, you get me? So that's kind of the angle that I'm thinking of this as. If you've never heard of dissociative absorption, it's usually on the scale for dissociation, like it's one of the potential things that you could have really high, but you don't have to have a disorder to rank high on absorption scales. It's the tendency to get really sort of immersed in material and to really have this sort of loose sense of self that just sort of can bleed into things. I read a lot of texts I read one really interesting text about shamans I was looking at Afro-Brazilian religions in my undergraduate thesis, and that engage in possession trance rituals, and people of these religions that are not all Afro-Brazilians. Everybody in Brazil, I think, not everybody, but a lot of different types of people engage in these families of religions, but people who engage in it actually ranked significantly higher in absorption, and so they were thinking maybe this is obviously must be a trait that makes it easier for you to enter these possession states. So that's what I was reading for my undergraduate thesis, but I was interested in the fact that absorption is not necessarily, dissociative absorption does not mean that you will have some kind of trauma or pathological dissociation, but it can be a really high indicator if you have that trait that you will develop some kind of psychopathology. It is significantly higher chance for you. Even just something like OCD, you are significantly more likely to probably develop a condition like that if you have a tendency towards dissociative absorption. I think that was definitely me my whole life. Very imaginative, always lost in my daydream worlds and things of that nature, and I did develop all sorts of different conditions. So I think that's pretty true. But yeah, I think it's helpful to look at maybe those normal dissociative sort of experiences as just they're probably traits that people develop or traits that people possess, but they're not necessarily dissociation. Last point on this text, but while everybody's coming at everybody anyways, actually this was in 2011, so nobody's coming at anybody anymore, but this is my one thing that I'm thinking of with this text, is I do agree with a lot of it. But one thing that I'm thinking is that I'm not even finished. Maybe, I don't think they're going to hit it though. So they go into a lot of the definitions of dissociation and are basically saying that some of these things, that if you were to say, let me find an example. I don't know whose definition they're coming at here, if it's Holmes or Brown, but it's somebody's. And what they're basically saying is that they didn't like that basically this definition of dissociation includes something compartmentalization, and it includes detachment. And they're basically going into the whole, somebody's definition here is basically saying, I think that dissociation is just the lack of, that the definition by these researchers is too loosey-goosey, essentially, and that it basically, so insufficient integration of the personalities at a most general feature of psychopathology as a whole, so not only dissociation, right? Has long been recognized that any psychopathological symptom is the expression of disorganization of certain integration level of a functional system. So just saying that something is disorganization of an integration level functional system, okay, mouthful, is not enough to say that something is dissociation. But here's my thinking. Okay, this might just be an uneducated opinion. Here's my thinking. Their basic definition is that dissociation just simply involves a lack of integration of the personality manifesting in the existence of two or more insufficiently integrated, that is, dissociative parts of the personality. So only when people have, okay, there's one part of them that isn't really connected to the other parts. So like, for example, they were going into an example of this woman who survived like the Holocaust, and she could only see herself in the Holocaust, like that, in that period of time where she was surviving the Holocaust, she saw that as like another version of her rather than her, like another person, right? So that's an example. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are situations where people do have multiple parts of themselves that they can't really integrate together, but that aren't traumatic. So, for example, like people who code switch, people who, I'm at work, I'm this really sort of professional person, but when I come home, I'm just, they're really putting it on because at home they're like really miserable, sad. I don't know, like, I feel like people, or there's some people that every environment they go into, they act as if they're a different person, but those people don't really connect. And I guess that's a non-traumatic experience. Maybe they did specifically say that it has to relate to trauma. They did say dissociation and trauma, but I was just like, okay, I think there's also maybe, is that just my question, is that also, would they consider that a dissociation? And what's enough for it to be trauma? So for example, if they acted like that because they were bullied in high school, and I don't know, or like not even bullied, maybe people just weren't that accepting of them or something, and so they developed a different persona to engage with other people. Is that it? Maybe if it's traumatic for them, right? I don't know. I just feel like people do that a lot normally, but I guess it always comes from maybe a distressing experience or a sort of repressed fear about themselves, or maybe people won't like me if I'm too much or stuff like that. But is that traumatic? And if it's not traumatic to that degree, is it still considered dissociation? That's one of my big questions that I would like answered of this text. But I also love to see them citing themselves a lot, because that inspired me. I was like, how satisfying would it be to be citing yourself and just be like, yeah, I can tell you because that's actually what I said. That excited me. I was like, one day. Okay, this next text I'm about to read has been really drifting through my mind recently, and I've just been really excited. I haven't gotten to finish it yet. I'm on page 28 of 116. I definitely have not read every word because it is far beyond my full grasp, but this is why you should always read things that are too hard for you, because I started it and I was like, this is a lot of technical jargon about hippocampal sharp wave ripples and episodic memory, and I was like, I'm not going to understand a lot of this, but I was just skimming, and I found one little part. I feel like the way that I operate when I go into text that I don't understand is I have like keywords that I've been like kind of picking up on or like tuning into that I know from what I do understand that I'll like narrow in on. And I saw the word suppressing. And what I'm looking for is the suppression of the hippocampal sharp wave ripples, which I think, well, now I'm getting more and more backing and evidence that this is connected to trauma, because I was already thinking when the hippocampal sharpwave ripples get suppressed, I would imagine that somehow they must have to get suppressed for this encoding to go wrong, right? But I wasn't sure, well, what if trauma doesn't actually suppress it? What if they don't even get suppressed? I was like, that's sort of a big little jump for me to take. But it's a big little jump for me to take. But as I've been reading, I have been finding more and more texts that have been backing this, and I just found this one. So it says, only when the suppressing effects of the subcortical neuromodulators are removed can a recurrent excitation in the CA3 recurrent collateral system proceed and release a SPW population burst. Okay, so only when the suppression is stopped can the burst occur. So see, again, this is one of those things where I'm like, I didn't fully understand, but I was like, I think that this is gonna help me. So I went into ChatGPT and I threw it on ChatGPT and was like, is this gonna help my hypothesis? I think that it does. And this is what ChatGPT showed me. Okay, can you explain this? The phrase, what are the suppressing effects of subcortical neuromodulators? WAR, are the subcortical modulators, does this relate to my project? And it says, yes, it is directly relevant. I knew it was going to be, I could already tell. And basically it's saying that when these chemicals that I guess occur in the brainstem and central regulators of the brain state, so all these little chemicals, basically they control when and how strongly the brain circuits can activate depending on your state. So usually sharpwave ripples occur during sleep and in rest periods. So basically while you're awake, so in times when the sharpwave ripples shouldn't really be going off, these chemicals will suppress the excitation in this region, which is what causes the memory, right? That's because when you're out and about, basically you don't want those memories just randomly consolidating when you're out and about. So it will start to suppress those ripples. So it's saving it for the perfect time, right? And that's so important to me, so central to me, because first of all, I explained this myself when I was trying to explain my trauma. And this was basically the path that led me down here. I could sense that my mind was waiting for the perfect moment to show me what was happening inside of me. So it wasn't, I was not remembering things when I was in really difficult situations. I only started to remember when I left the situation, right? So that was really important for me to read. I was like, that shows to me that your mind is going to suppress what's going on inside of you using these chemicals to stop you from consolidating until it wants to consolidate them, until it's in the right place to consolidate them. So that was really crucial for me to read this. And then in the right moment, it will basically, when it lifts, so when the subcortical suppression lifts during quiet wakefulness or NREM sleep, this system will fire spontaneously and then create the sharpwave ripple bursts. So that's what's really important to me. And I think that it gave me the explanation as to why the suppression happens and why that would happen in trauma, and why that's probably happening more in trauma because your body is waiting for a moment where it's safe for you to repress. Now I've read this text and they're all against repression, so I don't know if I want to use that word, but to sort of lift the veil. So I've been really excited thinking about this text the last few days. I read this part about 3 days ago, and I'm really excited to read the rest, and I think this is going to be extremely important to my project. It's actually even saying here that they already know that in PTSD or trauma, one of these chemicals is actually overactive even during sleep. So it's saying that could prevent the sharpwave ripples from happening. So again, I think it's just about making that connection to the trauma that I think will be extremely useful, and connecting the sharpwave ripples, the suppression of the memory, and then the sort of chemical process. So I've been finding a lot of really good biological backing for my hypothesis, and that's been really exciting me recently because it's starting to feel like something I can really back well in my introduction. I'm actually extremely exhausted right now. It's 10 p.m. So I'm just gonna leave really quick to get a sweet treat because I really want to work till midnight really badly. Okay, we're gonna unpack this together. Here's another one that I was like, I don't fully understand this, but I'm seeing timed trigger. So I was like, I think this is, and slow oscillation. I was like, I remember that. So I was like, I think this is gonna be correlated. So the synchronous discharge of neocortical neurons during the down-up transition of the slow oscillation can be a time trigger for SPWRs. So that's the sharp wave ripples. I was like, I think this is something. So I put it into the ChatGPT. Oh wait, no, this was not it. I put it into ChatGPT. Can you explain it? And so this one, my hypothesis has to do with the timing of the sharp wave ripples. And so the idea of the sharp wave ripples as a clocking mechanism in the brain. But I was connecting that to suppression in my mind. I have to remember why exactly I was thinking about suppression, which clearly I was thinking about it because that word kept jumping out to me, and I keep picking at it in different sort of articles that I'm reading. But so basically what this one is saying is that when it's in this down up transition, so when it's down, they're hyperpolarized, so not firing. And when they're up, they're depolarized, so they begin firing again in the synchronized burst, which basically is going to be the thing to start encoding these memories, right? So the cortical burst, these bursts basically act as a cue or a nudge for these sharp wave ripple events to begin and for the memory sequence to basically occur. So the cortex says, now it's a good time to consolidate, and the hippocampus fires up this SPWR, right? So I was a little bit confused as to how it related to the modulators, but I was like, I know it must, but I didn't know how to connect it. But basically what it says is that basically these neuromodulators are the gatekeepers. So during wakefulness or arousal, there we go. So when you have PTSD, you get hyper arousal. When I explained in my hypothesis video that sometimes when I'm walking around, I get extremely hyper aroused to the point where after a certain point in processing my trauma, I stopped really even being able to walk outside very well because I get extremely hyper aroused, right? And I can tell that my mind is not wanting. I explained this on my hypothesis video. I was like, I feel like my body is not wanting to process things while I'm outside in a difficult sort of like, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot happening. So I was feeling that in my body. My body and my intuition has been guiding me through this entire process, okay? So basically, during arousal, these modulators are high, which inhibits the ripples. And then once the brake is off, the up transition in the cortex acts as the go signal. So then it'll send the synchronous burst. So, this has been a really difficult little piece for me. Not difficult, I'm seeing this connecting, but I think I just need to sit with it so that everything connects, so I figure out how I want to put this into my neural network. Do I need to put in a subcortical modulator? No, right? I just need, well, maybe I want to put that in. Maybe I want to include that as well, and maybe does that overcomplicate things? Questions, but it's not important. Right now we're just reading. No, I want to think about this more. We have chemicals releasing in our body, and those chemicals tell us when is a good time to encode and when is not. And the time that we usually should be encoding is during sleep or rest states. So when we're out and about and we're in a wakeful state or in an aroused state, the chemicals are firing for us to not be processing. Right away, I'm thinking multiple things related to dissociation here, because first of all, that's telling me that maybe when people are out and about, there's two types of dissociation symptoms. So there's positive symptoms and there's negative symptoms. Positive symptoms are things that are added to your experience in a way. So for example, intrusive memories. There's also negative symptoms, so something like amnesia. And when people experience traumatic situations, this is coming from another text I've read, synthesizing everything right now, but basically these dissociative symptoms often manifest as people getting sort of these glimmers and these little chunks and fragments of their trauma just coming in, right? So that's telling me that this is definitely occurring in trauma. It's telling me that maybe while we're out, sometimes the ripples start to ripple while they're out, and maybe those are the positive symptoms. And then it's telling me that sometimes they are extremely suppressed, which is probably the negative symptoms and the amnesias, right? This is like, anyways, so I guess the whole point, I did also read a text, which is in one of my other literature review videos, where it already linked, I'm gonna actually, where it already essentially linked in rat models the idea that, so the suppression of hippocampal interneurons resulted in altered principle. Okay, I'm not going to say all this. Normally these neurons apparently fire in precise timing with the sharp wave ripples, and suppressing these interneurons disrupts the timing. So the sharp wave ripple in the hippocampus and the spindles in the neocortex need to be synchronized for the memory consolidation during sleep. So that was, I guess, and then because they weren't consolidated right, the memories couldn't transfer efficiently from short-term to long-term memory. That basically meant the animal could not consolidate the contextual memory due to the disrupted sharp wave ripple and spindle interaction. And we're already using this particular study to talk about potential treatment for PTSD. Now, I'm stressed right now because I have not studied neuroscience in any context but my bedroom and the text that I've read just in my room and on the bus and on the train. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is so interconnected, but I'm getting a little bit lost in all of the phrasing, the interneurons. I was like, the timing, I know the timing. When the timing is disrupted, the neurons are no longer firing at the optimal phase during the sharp wave ripple. So the sharp wave ripples need to go off at the optimal phase for the memory to consolidate. That's one thing. But then these, oh my gosh, too much. I'm going to save all this, but this is all going to get consolidated. My favorite, I've been using the word consolidated so much since I've started. It's like so convenient for me now. This is all going to get consolidated into my project, but I'm a little bit nervous, but then also excited because this is all connected. But I need to do the connecting because now I'm just questioning my hypothesis on the timing sequence element, which clearly is still extremely important, but I also do want to include the suppression element. And then different things are getting suppressed. So here it's an interneurons getting suppressed, but then other places it's, I don't know, the sharp wave ripple is getting suppressed. I'll put everything together. I'll synthesize everything. Questions about things I don't know. Am I allowed to modify my hypothesis? Yeah, right? I still can modify it a bit because I haven't tested anything yet. I haven't even written my methods section. I'm still just doing my literature review. So yeah, right? If I want to, I can still change it. Okay, it is 11:21 right now. I didn't finish this text, but in my defense, it is 116 pages of dense technical jargon, and I am exhausted. I might still read another. I have some texts that are like really tiny, so I might read them right now and come back to this one because it's about to get into the computational modeling of SPWRs. This is like the best text I've ever read for my project, so I'm like, my god, I need to I can't, every time I'm like, oh, maybe I should just call it a day and just finish here because I don't know if the rest is going to be relevant. It just gets more relevant. So I'm like, okay, clearly I should read this entire 116 page text right now, even though I've been skimming some sections. I'm like, this is zero to do with me. I'll just pass through. But whoa, this was a lot. I think, well, now, with citing my own theory that I'm making, but I do think that I consolidate not only my memories, but also well, I guess these are memories too, memories of the things that I learned and read throughout the day. I think that's why sleep is so important, right? So I'm gonna sleep in a bit, and I think when I wake up tomorrow, workday, Sunday, workday, because I want to finish this as quick as I can before I start my master's degree program. That's my, hopefully before then, so I have time to just at least take a month to not think about anything before I start my master's degree program. But anyways, so I'm done with this text for now. As you can see, there's a lot for me to unpack here, and I think it will potentially be extremely important for me to understand all of this and make a more consolidated, my favorite word, a more consolidated theory based on everything I've read. I do still think the timing sequence element is extremely important. I was already looking for things related to suppression, so I think I'm just too tired right now to remember why I was looking for that, because I was already relating to my theory that I was making, but I don't remember exactly what was the context that made me think I'm going to start looking for things relating to suppression. So I need to sit with that, because it might be already integrated into what I was already going to make, and I just am maybe not thinking it through. Like maybe I was already conceptually sort of including this without looking for it. So yeah, so you're gonna see me probably read 2-3 more short texts, but I'm gonna take a shower first and then go to bed. It's not over, don't you cry. Okay, I want to end this on a little bit more of a personal note, just some last thoughts that I was reflecting on as I was doing all this reading. But first of all, I think this whole thing just speaks to the supremacy of a comparative literature and societies degree, that we were just taught to read everything. It did not matter. We were literally encouraged for like our theses and things to just read anything, read from any kind of field of study that you are sort of drawn to, and just go for it, and you can make connections. That was basically the whole entire premise of our degrees. I mean, we did do comparing cultures. Anybody who did a comparative literature and societies degree, you had to show that you knew 2 languages outside of English, so mine were Portuguese and Spanish, and then you had a sort of area of interest that you were in. But my area of interest changed completely, and from there it was very loosey like goosey. People were just really learning kind of anything. We had people writing plays, we had people just, it was basically just an amazing sort of exercise in learning how to think critically, involve yourself and make connections within a lot of different fields. So I think there's no way I'd be doing this if I didn't get a comparative literature and societies degree, even though it doesn't sound like it would be related, but I think it most definitely is related. I think it just taught me to jump right in and just look for like connections anywhere. I feel like the neuroscience I've been kind of learning on the fly and also from my own experience. But that leads into my second point, which is that I think on a more spiritual note, this has just been such a learning experience for me, and it's been extremely powerful for me as a woman, just training myself to trust my body, trust my instincts, and that our body and our instincts and things like that are also extremely important, extremely knowledgeable. This was also sort of my thesis and in lines of things that I sort of just read or was interested in. But I think that we, coming at it from a more, I don't know, comparative literature angle, I think that the problem with the sort of Western science, Western way of thinking domination of knowledge is that we very often do not credit or sort of value the knowledge of the body and of lived experience and things of that nature here and there. I think it's a lot about learning, reading, getting a good education, and that means that a lot of knowledge, a lot of non-Western knowledge. There was one really interesting text that I don't know if I'll frame completely right, that I read in my race and decolonial dialogues class, and it was about dance and how dance also is a form of knowledge, but we don't see it, we don't interact with it as if it's a form of knowledge in the same way as something like science, because it's all in the body. And there's just all sorts of different sort of learning methods and sort of ways to disseminate knowledge and to understand the world that are not just Western frameworks. And I think that very often in our Western world, we have learned to discredit our bodies. And I think particularly as a woman, we see this a lot. Women often go into doctors and they say, hey, I'm having this issue, and they're very often discredited. Their intuition about their own bodies is often discredited, and their experience. And, very often people are quick to say, oh, you're just anxious, things like that I think a lot of us girls get this when we're trying to talk about very serious issues. Even myself, when I was sometimes trying to explain what was going on with me, I think that even in the most well-meaning ways, I got a lot of people meeting me with, maybe I'm a little bit of a hypochondriac, my mind is playing tricks on me. And that was extremely frustrating for me, because no matter how I wanted to look at it that way and wanted to embrace a narrative I think a lot of people were sort of lovingly guiding me towards, I couldn't escape the trauma that I was experiencing and the way that it was coming up for me. And it's just been such a healing journey to do this project. And it's also been bringing up those memories for me to work through in a different way. I think even though I can't verbalize all of them 100%, but they just come up in how I'm processing the worlds. Particularly, I think when I read things about why my body processed it the way that it did, even on a more chemical level, I think it makes me feel validated, and then it in turn gives me that safety for things to come up because I have a framework with which to meet the emotions. And I think that's a really difficult part about being in an overlap of psychology where there's not enough information and where there's doubt. And probably for anybody who has any kind of medical condition where there's doubt or we just don't know enough, I think particularly in the mental health department, it's a little bit hard because I read that people with PTSD, if you have a traumatic experience, but people meet you with a lot of support and you get a lot of that sort of validation and support right away, you are significantly less likely to develop PTSD. And like, even if the experience was traumatic, you might not develop PTSD if you have that as a sort of place where people meet you. But unfortunately, I think when you have an experience that, say you're a woman, people are less likely to believe you, or you're at a weird overlap where people don't really know how to meet your experience. For me, it was extremely difficult because I felt like I had no way of communicating to people what was happening to me, and I didn't have a good framework for people to meet me with. I think that even I had an absolutely amazing therapist. She was great and she navigated everything in, I think, the best possible way. She was validating, and of course there's going to be a lot of overlaps where I think everybody's figuring it out. My therapist as well is trying to figure out like, hey, what's going on here? But I think that even so, I think because there's that little bit of confusion, naturally it's hard to meet somebody with a solution. Meanwhile, I think, for example, let's say you have depression, we have quite a good sense of why people have that, how it works. Of course, we're still studying it, but you can say get on, there's a medication for it, there's particular coping strategies and things of that nature. But I think it's very hard when you're having a really complex experience of PTSD that we don't have enough information for. It's really, really difficult because I think people just don't know how to meet you where you are. And I was even seeing that in the literature and the text that I read about people working with dissociative identity disorder patients, and the people who didn't have that really specific dissociation training had a much, much, much harder time on every possible front interacting with those patients. So I think developing good frameworks with which to meet people is such an important part of psychology, and I feel like I've been having to develop my own framework to meet myself and my condition. And the reason I could follow myself down this path is that I could start to see what was successful because I started healing and I started to interact with the world in a different way and feel better. So that was a sign for me to keep going down that path and keep learning that and keep exploring that element of how I process my emotions. So it's been a really big healing journey for me. But even reading today about the whole chemical situation, and that validated me so much. And as I was walking to buy snacks, I was having stuff kind of come up, and as I was sort of laying in bed, I was having stuff come up just now, and not in a huge way, but again, I think it's healing because when it comes up, I know what to do with it rather than being extremely distressed by it. So again, that's why this work has been so important for me, and it's already having that impact on me. So that's why I'm motivated to keep going, because I know it's going to have that impact for other people if I can get something like this, because then we're not going to be lost and confused and sort of stumbling around in the dark when people have this experience. So that's what's been really important for me. And yeah, it's just been a healing process. But particularly for my women, if you're listening to this, keep trusting your body. Don't care what people say. If they tell you, oh, you're just anxious, you're in the nicest of words, they'll tell you you're hysterical. The people have all sorts of words for female hysteria that aren't female hysteria these days. You just have anxiety. Did you look that up on WebMD? Things like, it's like just things like that I think we meet women at that level, and it's like, women, keep trusting your gut, and if you feel called to it, go into science, and you might discover something, because I think that we have just been taught and taught and taught to not follow our bodies and to not listen to ourselves and to invalidate ourselves as women, and it's extremely difficult, and it just leads to these really traumatizing sort of outcomes. I've seen so many women go in with symptoms of hormonal sort of imbalances, even really serious things. People keep, I know this girl on Instagram who, she ended up having really bad, severe endometriosis, and she went into the doctor over and over again saying there's something wrong, something wrong. They're like, no, there's nothing, go back, go back. And then she ended up like something ruptured, and now it's like extremely severe. She was like in like a wheelchair. It happens to us all the time. It's actually really bad, the amount that we are just taught to suppress the reality of our bodies and what's going on inside. And I'm telling you here from this experience, look at this. Don't trust your body. Listen to it. It is extremely intelligent. Our bodies are extremely intelligent, and our bodies have knowledge of their own. So yeah, that is my conclusion for today. It's just been so rewarding to keep following my intuition, and I highly recommend everybody follow their intuition forever and ever and ever. Bye.